time. Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Home Secretary, for making yourself available at such, I know, will be a very busy time for your department. I want to carry on the issue of border controls, because it's probably one of the issues that has come up most in my inbox. Constituents really are very, very concerned. I completely, obviously, support basing our policy on scientific advice, but I think when it seems to run so counterintuitively to what people perceive, I think it's really important that that advice is published and made available to them. So I welcome the commitment that it will be. In particular, I wanted to ask about comments from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, who said that the risk of infection from overseas arrivals remains minuscule at the moment relative to in-country infection. But he did add that screening at airports might become an option once the overall in-country infection rate had dropped. And I was wondering, how will that risk be determined, and under what criteria would quarantining arrivals become an approach that you might consider?
Well, I think first of all, those comments were made a few weeks ago, and of course, those comments were also made based on the SAGE evidence that has been that I've referred to in the medical advice. And today is the first time that I've heard the request from the committee to publish that. So obviously, we will follow that up through our perm secretaries. I think first of all, it's important to recognise, notwithstanding public perception, the point about not screening passengers on arrival. We've had low passenger numbers, obviously, and that would simply not make a material impact. There have also been queries and questions amongst the medical and scientific community about the value of thermal screening, whether or not that's going to identify, whether or not it would give false positives. There are a range of issues around that, and also it's easy to circumvent by taking fever-suppressing drugs, paracetamol and things of that nature. You specifically asked, under what circumstances would measures at the border, such as quarantining, apply, and then can't come in? Well, first of all, that would still be based on the science. It would also be based upon any changes outside of this country. For example, as easements to lockdown may take place with other countries, and more people perhaps will choose to travel and choose to fly, we still rightly so have to think about the impact of a second wave. We've gone through a great deal of grief and hardship in our country, and I think the public response has been absolutely extraordinary. The support to staying at home and listening to the advice of the medical advisors, scientific advisors, Public Health England, as to why we need to protect the NHS by not overwhelming it. And of course, that would be a crucial component to this, along with, as government has outlined already, the 5 tests, making sure that we can continue to protect the NHS, that there is a sustained and consistent fall in the daily death rate, and showing that the infection rate is decreasing. Showing an infection rate decreasing domestically obviously means that we want to prevent that second wave. So this is under discussion. I can confirm that, and I mentioned earlier on that we are reviewing everything. We have to do that. It's the right and responsible thing to do. Reviewing the science, obviously. Science from 3 weeks ago can differ from 2 weeks later. And let's not forget, even in the data that does come forward, on issues such as the daily death rate, the impact of the virus across the country, there is a lag in some of that data coming through as well. So we have to work with the scientists, work with the data, and also look at the operational side of things. This isn't something that could just come in overnight. We will have to think about the practical measures of this, how this would be delivered, which kind of ports of entry first and foremost, and how that would work from a practical basis. But we rule nothing out at all, and it is right and responsible that we can keep these measures under review.
And are you preparing some of your key teams, such as the Border Force, in any way, in case they do have to enforce quarantine at the border in the future?
Absolutely. And Border Force have been part of this active discussion over several weeks. So let me be very clear, this isn't something that has manifested itself overnight. I commissioned the discussion 6 weeks ago in government, And so this has been an active discussion. I led the discussion with Border Force across government, so with Cabinet Office in particular. So this isn't just the Home Office on its own. This is a cross-government discussion led by the Cabinet Office with Department of Transport. In fact, Department of Transport as well are working with us on this and have been over the last 6 weeks, as have the Department of Health and Social Care. Yes, because we work to the PHE guidance, but also to the medical and scientific advice. But of course, they have clear views on this as well. And as ever, with the efficacy of whatever decisions are made and how that's published going forward and how that's operationalised, we have to base our decisions not just on personal preferences or anything of that nature, but we have to base this on sound facts and sound science and what this actually means with flows of numbers coming in. And it's not just airports, by the way, of course, it's ports.
Of course. And final question from me. You mentioned how fantastic the public response is, and I agree, but in order to enforce social distancing and to make sure that people are, staying at home, protecting the NHS, we need public consent to do that. And as you say, we've had a huge amount of grief and hardship in our country at the moment. I appreciate that passenger numbers have declined a huge amount, but given that you only need a small handful of people coming into the country with the virus to restart another outbreak, do you think there is a danger that if we don't properly explain to the public why we're keeping the borders open, if we don't bring in or consider more carefully bringing in quarantine measures, that we may lose public consent? People will feel, why am I having to stay at home, not being able to see my grandchildren and the people I love, when we've got people arriving in from coronavirus hotspots every day with no quarantine measures placed on them at all?
Well, I think first of all, and we can, I'll bring in Shona Dunn shortly, because obviously she oversees some of the borders work here. I think first of all, March seems like a long time ago. We're at the end of April right now, and so much has happened. I think the British public have been incredible in terms of their spirit of national unity and the way in which they themselves have taken responsibility, personal responsibility themselves. When this first started, and this wasn't just at the end of March, but if we recall going back into February, we did ask people to self-isolate, people coming back from Italy in February and March, if you recall, and we found places for travellers to self-isolate and effectively then quarantine. But when community transmission accelerated at quite a rate, the need was much bigger. But the point is now, as you have highlighted, we're heading into a different phase of this virus. And with this different phase, that means different measures will, I think, inevitably come in. We should also emphasise as well, I'm going to come back to the point that I made earlier on to the chair, the largest group of nationals arriving to the UK have been British citizens and other resident nationals as well, people travelling back as measures were closing down, particularly towards that end of March period. But as I've said, all of this is under review. Shona might want to elaborate on some of the measures that could come in and how we would operationalise that. And with that, of course, this comes back to the practical ways in which we operationalise, and then, of course, how we communicate that, both to the public, but also internationally to people that may be looking to come into our country and under what auspices they will be coming into the country. And let's not forget, one of the key points I've made is that we, focus on repatriation of British nationals, but we also focus on keeping ports open to keep goods flowing in particular. 7 weeks ago, we were seeing panic buying. We were seeing our supermarket shelves clearing out pretty rapidly at fast rates. If you look at what's happened since, we've kept the supply of goods and medicines coming through. So there will have to be communications around this. But I'm sure Shona, if Shona can come in, she can speak about some of the border management as well and some of the work that we've been doing.